environment correspondent at The Guardian, so I've been taking an interest in the cost of cutting carbon, policies to reduce the cost of renewables for a bit more than the last decade, I think. And it's extraordinary, actually, how these costs and the expectations of them change over time, or indeed in some cases don't change. We've all obviously had a roller coaster ride with the European carbon emissions trading system, which is supposed to give us a sort of benchmark for how much it costs to cut carbon. Sadly, that never really happened, and of course that scheme is now pretty much on its last legs, you'd have to say, at the moment. So we might be able to have some discussion around whether that could be revived in the future, whether that may have any kind of impact or not. In the absence of that, what have we got in order to give us a sort of a benchmark price? Well, it's very difficult to put any sort of price on carbon in the absence of that. It's very difficult to get a real handle on what are the true costs of renewables, and especially the true costs of renewables relative to other fuels, and taking externalities such as carbon dioxide, the effect on the climate, into account. I've just been in Germany. I've just come back, and I had a fantastic conversation. There was a panel there made up of people from business and from the Environment Ministry, various other people, and they told me something that just sounded so much like exactly what you hear coming from the same quarters here, that it was uncanny. They said it's dreadful. The German economy just cannot cope with what's going on in terms of climate change and the cost of renewables. We have the highest energy prices in Europe, they said. We are desperately uncompetitive as a result. We don't know what to do without nuclear. We don't know what to do with nuclear either. And you know, the cost of renewables is such a massive concern for us. And also we're trying to think about shale gas. I listened to this and I thought, well, this is exactly the same. And what interested me most actually was this idea that they have the highest energy prices in Europe. Like, I'm hearing all the time, and I can see there are people in this audience who can tell us a bit more about this, that we have the highest energy prices in Europe. So, you know, we can't both be right. So it'd be great to shed some light on some of these issues. These issues are very opaque. We've just had the strike prices come through for wind energy in the UK, for renewables. We don't have the strike price for nuclear yet, and if we've got anyone on the panel who can tell us when we're going to get that, then don't tell everyone, just have a word with me. And we've got, you know, we're in the middle of the biggest shake-up of the energy industry since privatisation. So what I'd like to know, and we'll all get a chance to sort of ask questions and so on shortly, but we're going to hear from our panellists first, because we've got a very distinguished panel who I'm about to introduce to you. But what I'd like to focus on is, you know, what do we really know about the cost of energy, the cost of renewables, and also what is the cost of not transforming our energy system in the ways that we've been set up. We've got carbon budgets. We've got the fourth carbon budget, which is up for review next year. But you know, if we're going to stick to that budget, we're obviously going to have to do an awful lot more than we've been doing at the moment. So this is the landscape we're talking about. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to let each of our panellists in turn navigate their way through that landscape for us, try to answer some of these questions, and then we're going to have a more interactive discussion where all of you will get to say your piece or ask your questions, our panellists. So, with no further ado, what I'll do is I'll introduce our panellists sort of one by one as they speak, because I think that's going to be easier and quicker. I'm only going to let you speak for 5 minutes each. And we've got a clock on the wall here, which I'll be keeping an eye on, so you don't have to. I'm going to invite you first, Charles. Charles Hendry, I'm sure needs no introduction to anyone in the room. He's a former energy minister, Minister and MP from Milden, and is now chairman of the 4Wind, which is just an offshore wind consortium, is that?
That's right.
Yeah. So maybe you're going to be able to tell us how much offshore wind actually costs.
Well, thank you, Fiona. Thank you also for starting off with the international outlook, which I think is really helpful, because people often used to say to me that, well, if this is so good, why aren't other countries doing it in the same way? Why are we doing more than Europe? We are, of course, at just about the bottom of the European League. We're a bit above Malta, we're a bit above Luxembourg, but everybody else is making much greater use of renewables than we are. When we look also at what happens in some of the countries in the world which make the most use of hydrocarbons, Saudi Arabia looking to diversify heavily into nuclear and solar, Kazakhstan, where I was with the Prime Minister last week, looking heavily to go down the route of onshore wind and nuclear. Norway, 99% of its electricity coming from renewables. So the most heavily intensive oil and gas countries in the world see the importance of renewables. And if it's right for them, if it's right for China, 1/3 of the wind turbines in the world last year were put up in China, that if it's right for them, then it should be right for all countries which are looking to see how they can take their economies forward. You've asked a very direct question in terms of the price of offshore wind, and we're going to have to work with the framework set by government, and the contracts are different. But subsidies have a critical role in this debate. Every new technology in the energy sector has required subsidy. We're still subsidising nuclear to the tune of billions of pounds a year. 1/3, rising to 1/2 of the debt budget was on decommissioning of old nuclear plants. We initially gave tremendous amounts of subsidy to support an emerging oil and gas industry. Now it's very profitable. In every sector that we have required subsidy to begin with. Now, the challenge for government is how one uses subsidy to bring down the costs of those technologies. It shouldn't be a support mechanism where it keeps them high for all time. It should be a mechanism for driving them down over time. And that's what we've done with the RO of reducing the support mechanism for onshore wind and for offshore wind, with the feed-in tariffs doing it very dramatically, and with some unpopularity for solar. But all of that designed to recognise what was happening to the cost base and saying this should be used in order to bring down the cost for consumers. There's things which government can do as well in a more structural way. Market reform is at the absolute heart of what we're trying to do to secure over £100 billion of investment in our electricity low-carbon sector. We don't have any choice about that. We can't extend the life of the old nuclear plants beyond the life extensions being granted. We can't extend the life of the old coal plants, not because of government policy, but because the companies have built new plants based on the assumption that they're closing, and they will successfully sue the government if it decides to go back on that understanding. So this isn't something which we have to secure, this amount of new investment into the low-carbon sector. We then need to be seeing at how we take risk out of that. So by the government being the counterparty, takes out some of the risk of the new contracts for difference, then the long-term nature of them, again, starts to de-risk them. And all of those are designed to bring down the cost of those new technologies for consumers. We're also looking at how we can bring down the cost of individual technologies. The offshore wind cost reduction task force significantly looked at how it can get down the cost down well towards £100 per megawatt hour. Looking at how you build the connection cables at a lower price, and doing that in a much more competitive way through the OFTO regime, through Ofgem. And all of that with a single purpose in mind, of saying that if these technologies are truly to play a part in the long-term energy needs of this country, then we've got to bring down their costs in order to ensure that that happens. We want to bring on new technologies as well. And we want this to be the country where we really get the benefit of that. And so the marine energy areas which have been identified around the coast, north of Scotland, southwest of England, are where we want people with wave technologies, tidal technologies from around the world to bring those to the United Kingdom, to help develop them, to see through the technical challenges, to bring them to maturity, and so that we are then the country where those technologies lead the world from. Because there are a few technologies where Britain, having missed out on some of them historically, can actually be world leaders. offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, and tidal technologies being 3 amongst those. So all of those are designed to see how we can bring forward new technologies, how we can get a critical mass developing in this country, and so that we can then start to ensure that we get the long-term security of supply that we need, and that we do it in a low-carbon way, and we do it in an affordable way for consumers as well. And the final point, if I'm still just inside my 5 minutes, is if we look at what's been driving up our bills in our homes, it's not been the cost of renewables. This year, the cost of the renewable obligation is about £30 per household. If you look at what's been the real driver, it's been the increasing price of wholesale gas. Just about the time when I became minister in early 2010, the gas price was 40 pence a therm. It's now 65 pence a therm, well over double. And when at the moment before I came into the room, I checked how much of our electricity is coming from gas. 1/3 is coming from gas as we meet in this room. And so if the wholesale price of gas has gone up by that margin, that's been the real driver. So we need to see renewables as part of a low-carbon balanced energy mix, as part of the way in which we protect consumers from the variabilities of the hydrocarbon price, and how we do that in a way that has security of supply built into the equation as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you. That was very concise, and as you say, did take a very international view. And in fact, just on your last point, DEC put out a statement only this afternoon saying exactly that it was wholesale gas prices that were pushing up our bills, and that I think that as a result of their measures that we will be saving £166 a year each. It's a very, very precise estimate, isn't it? £166 a year each. If you're not saving that exact amount in 2020, then there's something wrong. And we can talk perhaps some more about how they reached those conclusions shortly. Next up, we're going to move over to Ben Sykes, who's the UK Country Manager for Dawn Energy, which I'm sure will be familiar to you all as an investor in various renewables in the UK. Formerly the Director of Innovation at the Carbon Trust. Ben also used to work in the belly of the beast as part of the fossil fuel industry at Hess Corporation and indeed at Shell. Thanks very much. If you can give us your...
I shall do my best to stick to the 5 minutes. Good evening. Thank you for introducing me, Fiona. Those of you who may not know who Dong Energy is, maybe worth a little introduction. Dong Energy is a Danish energy company. We are about 6,000 employees, including about 500 in the UK. As I was saying to Charles earlier, we're a frustratingly balanced energy company. We do E&P, we're the biggest player in the west of Shetlands for exploration. We're doing some big developments there with Total and others. We have a big thermal power business in the Danish and a few other continental European markets, although we're doing a lot of biomass conversion there. But our big play in the UK, and indeed our big play overall, is in offshore wind. So the topic of the day, I guess not just for this debate, but more generally, is how we're going to cut the cost of going low carbon. And Fiona's raised this question, I think, very concisely. We are a big player in the offshore wind market. We have about 40% of the world's offshore wind business. We develop, we build and we operate offshore wind farms. So we like to think we know a little bit about how to get offshore wind farms built efficiently and effectively. We work in Denmark, we work in the UK, we work in Germany, we work in France, and we're looking at other markets in Europe as well. A lot of questions around costs. I think what I would like to say first of all is that we at Dong Energy, and I in particular, do recognise that the transformation to a lower carbon energy system cannot and should not be achieved at any cost. There's a lot of quite correct debate about what can we afford, and we've already heard from Charles some of the facts around how much we can potentially save through going down the low carbon route. £166 per household, I do like that number. I'm sure we'll hear more numbers from Peter later, which might sound rather different. I guess the fact is the future is an uncertain place, Having worked 20 years in the oil and gas industry, I can certainly assure you that the future of fossil fuel prices is an extremely uncertain place, and if anyone knows what they're going to be, please let me know. I could become a very rich man very quickly. So, can we afford it? I guess we need to look at that question in the context of hugely growing demand for energy in the UK and more widely. The need to tackle climate change, and I'm kind of assuming that we in this room recognise that going low carbon and leading the transformation of the energy system, that we recognise that as an imperative. If not, then let's just carry on burning coal, because frankly, if we don't care about the environment, we don't think the environment is threatened by that, then clearly that is going to deliver low-cost energy, but I would say at a very high price that's unacceptable. We also know, as we've heard, that we need to replace the ageing infrastructure that we have. We've got nuclear plants going out of operation. We've got a number of power plants that will need replacing. And I think this question of the counterfactual is very important. We talk a lot about how many 100 billion it's going to cost to get us to 2020 with a resilient energy system. Well, there is no option to spend nothing. And I think the idea that there is an option that actually just doesn't make prices go up for consumers is living in la-la land, and we should recognise that there is no option to do nothing. We have to invest one way or another in our energy system. So for me the question is, why would we not invest in low carbon now, particularly given the idea based on modelling by the CCC and by DEC that we could be saving between 25 and 45 billion pounds by 2020 because of the risk of increasing gas prices. If gas prices go up significantly more, it could be as much as 100 billion. So there is a real cost imperative, I believe, to investing in low carbon and in particular in renewables. Now, we know there's lots of gas coming along with shale gas. As Fiona said, I actually have an E&P background. I'm a geologist. Proudly have my coloured pencils still at home. I can assure you from everything I've seen, shale gas is not going to be a very exciting contributor to the UK energy system for some time. I'm sure when you've been driving around the UK or travelling around the UK, you'll have noticed how many drilling rigs can be seen in the UK. Not very many. It's not like the US. We don't have a supply chain. We have a lot of challenges to develop that energy resource. It's a great energy resource, but it doesn't come for free. It doesn't come anytime soon. So we need to find another solution. We obviously believe offshore wind is the right answer, and I'll explain why. A lot of people talk about offshore wind not being effective, not being efficient. I'll happily chat to anyone afterwards who would like to talk about capacity factors, reliability, and any other aspect of operating offshore wind or indeed onshore wind farms. But there is a price to pay, and I'm a consumer too. I do care about how much it's going to cost to get us to that low carbon energy system. We have to find the right balance between driving the regeneration of our power infrastructure with low carbon solutions and managing tightly the cost burden that we are prepared to put on as a society on ourselves as consumers, whether we're domestic or industrial and commercial consumers. So I guess our view would be offshore wind can offer a solution that manages that balance. If we talk about cost reduction, we know offshore wind is not a cheap technology at the moment. I don't think anyone will pretend that it is. The question is, where can we get to with cost reduction? We believe at Dong Energy that we have the wherewithal to get costs down to €100 a megawatt hour for projects that we're bringing forward for sanction in 2020. That's euros, not pounds, which, you know, who knows, they might be the same by 2020, hopefully not. We believe we can do that. We're looking very hard at the technology, at turbines, at foundations, at electrical systems, all the components that drive the cost of energy. We're also looking at how we can develop the supply chains. I'm not going to talk about UK jobs and the value that that will bring, although I do believe it's very significant. But the growth in the supply chain in the UK will also help in the medium and long term to drive those costs down. So we do believe that the cost reduction is possible, it is real. We've made a very public commitment to achieve that at Dong Energy, and having looked in some detail at how we're going to do it, I do actually believe it's possible. Some of our competitors are dubious, but I look forward to proving them wrong in the next 7 years. So cost is a big challenge, but it's one that I believe we can meet. I think the other question then is around policy. Why does policy matter? Policy matters a lot to us because we bring institutional investors into our wind farms. Gunflute Sands out in the Essex, off the Essex coast. We've brought in a Japanese company, Marubeni. They've invested there. Anholt in Denmark. We've brought in Pension Denmark. So we're bringing in significant amounts of institutional money into the wind farm. So there is a lot of money out there, and there are a lot of opportunities. I believe that the financing of offshore wind is entirely doable at the scale that the UK intends to deliver. We're talking maybe 10 gigawatts of capacity installed by 2020. There's no doubt that that is possible. There's certainly plenty of money around, and we believe that we can show, and others can do the same, other developers can show that that investment opportunity is one worth taking. But that only comes if we can have policy stability, and we've had good policy stability for some years actually through the RO. Charles has talked about the digression of the ROs. Costs have been pushed down, quite rightly. We believe that the contract for difference coming out of the MR will continue that journey. It's going to be a big challenge for us. Obviously, we would like higher strike prices. We're a business who wouldn't. But we recognise that those strike prices have to come down through the remainder of this decade and into the next decade. The big challenge for us, though, is knowing what's happening after 2020. When we're developing wind farms, we know we've got a 5-6 year lead time between starting to invest in those wind farms and when we make the investment decision. So we're already getting to the point where we've got to decide, will there be a policy beyond 2020? We know we've got the levy control framework that nicely gives us some clarity, but also gives some confidence to consumers about the total cap on the burden that will be placed on their bills. But what happens after 2020? So I think for us, one of the key challenges for driving down costs is creating longer term certainty for the industry so that we can develop our pipeline of projects and continue on that cost reduction journey. Very much doable, but we're not there yet. So just to summarise, I guess, we have some challenges ahead. We've got to get costs down, we've got to see more policy certainty beyond 2020, but a lot of the pieces are falling into place. And in the meantime, we're pressing ahead, we're building offshore wind farms, we've got 2 in construction in the UK as we speak. We're driving down costs, and we are pulling in new investors into our wind farms. So effectively, we're just getting on with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to get that view from the industry there. And just on this issue of longer term certainty, something that I'm sure we'll want to address is the fact that the government, of course, has said very firmly no to the idea of setting a new EU-wide target for renewables for 2030. So obviously that's quite an effect on the industry, and we'll be watching that very closely. So I think we'll probably bring that up in the discussion later. Thank you very much for that. Now, we've got slightly out of order here, but Guy, I think you're next. I'll introduce, you don't need an introduction, but you've already introduced me, so I'll return the favour. Guy is, of course, the Head of Environment and Energy here at the Policy Exchange. He previously had the pleasure of working in Hong Kong for the newswire Agence France Presse, and that must have given you a very interesting perspective globally. So perhaps we'll hear a bit of the international version from you as well. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Fiona. If I learned anything from 3 years in Hong Kong, reporting on Hong Kong, it's don't trust what the Chinese government says 100% straight away. I think that would be my lesson, especially which has relevance to this debate about how serious China is about low carbon decarbonisation. There's 2 key points I want to make in my allotted time. One, we need to get to a situation as soon as possible where low carbon technologies, of course including renewables, can compete in a market without subsidy. It was kind of implicit in lots of what we talked about earlier, but I think it bears, it's important to re-stress it again. The second point I make is we do need to offer extra support for low carbon technologies, but that support should be targeted carefully and costs should be controlled. The first thing I want to talk about is what we at Policy Exchange see as the great original sin of energy policy, which is the 2020 renewable energy target. The reason that we see that it's caused some of the problems that we kind of talk about in the debate is for several reasons. One, it's forced us to focus on the mass deployment of known but not yet mature technologies, i.e. we needed to find stuff that could be deployed on the scale we needed, and the time scale we needed. The effect of this, I'd argue, has made decarbonisation more expensive than it needed to be, and that feeds in some of the politics I guess we'll be discussing later. To speak to Fiona's point earlier about the ETS and how that works, of course the effect of the renewable energy target is to undermine the ETS and the price signal. It favours one group of technologies over others and means that potentially cheaper ways of cutting carbon are not taken. The third point, and I say this as a kind of somebody who's in favour of markets, is led us to a world of more administrative price setting, which has led to, and more intervention, which has led to more intervention. The situation we are drifting towards is a power market where every element has to be decided by officials or, in the EMR context, people working for National Grid. It's deeply worrying for me as somebody who thinks that market rather than central planning is the best system we have for allocation of capital. There's a side issue of whether it's created or helped create some of the risks about whether we can keep the lights on, but I don't think we should overplay that. It's probably not central to the discussion today. I'd say crucially, it's politically, it risks undermining the case for action on climate change, which we think is absolutely vital. I take Charles's point about how much it contributes at the moment to energy bills, cost of renewable energy, but that is set to increase quite significantly over the next 4 to 5 years, and that's the area that we think is most worrying. We did some polling recently where we looked at what people are most worried about. The question was, the most helpful thing politicians could do to improve life for you and your family. People were presented with 18 different options, including improve local schools, reduce crime in their area, and number one was reduce energy bills. Now we can get into an argument about whether the best way of doing that is low carbon, you avoid some of the risks of gas prices, but that sets the context for what we're looking at over the next few years. Because what we've created with the renewable energy target is a question of how do we meet the renewable energy target as cheaply as possible, if we've had that question at all. Obviously, when we've got things like support for microgen solar feed-in tariffs, I'm not sure if we're actually having that conversation, but the general question is how do we meet the renewable energy targets cost effectively as possible, rather than what I think is a more important question of how we reduce the cost of new technologies and renewable technologies. So what might a better alternative look like? I'm going to talk briefly about kind of wider principles about what we think a good heading towards low carbon energy market might look like, and then a kind of the question of how we get there from where we are with EMR. One, you need a clear carbon price. We keep going back to it all the time at Policy Exchange, but I think I'll make the point that if you don't have a clear carbon price, then you're not really serious about tackling climate change at all. And I think that's a big question that Europe has to grapple with over the next 18 months. I tend to favour the ETS, mainly because it exists, and the idea of getting 27 countries to agree on carbon tax is pretty tricky, but I don't mind particularly if it's either way. But if this isn't in place, then we have a big long-term problem. But it's not sufficient by itself. We need support for developing new technologies, and the history of looking at any development of new technologies will tell you that's the case. So the questions we need to ask: does this mean a bigger focus on early stage R&D? That kind of number of how much we spend at the R&D stage in energy has actually fallen quite significantly since liberalisation. Most of that is to do with the fact we're spending a lot less money on nuclear power than we were, much of which was very badly spent. It's worth highlighting. It's risen again since the renewable obligation, but we don't seem to be doing brilliantly in this area. I'd say CCS is an example of where we've particularly failed. Other issues, this kind of more early developmental technologies, negative emissions technologies is one that looks at, do we have clear strategies for those? The second thing we should look at about which technologies we support is having clear criteria about which we think are worth supporting. I don't by the kind of we should support all technologies. We have a limited pool of money that we can spend in the UK context and the global context to tackle an issue like climate change, so we should be very careful about how we spend it. So the criteria that we've set out in the papers that we've done is, one, what is the long-term potential contribution to global mitigation? Is this technology going to be globally important? And I think that's a big question for offshore wind. It's certainly important in the UK context, but it's very important internationally, where you don't have some of the advantages the UK has. And secondly, is the money we spend, how can it maximise long-term global cost reductions? And then you get into a much more, if you start asking those questions, you get a much more interesting conversation than the question of how we meet the 2020 target as cost effectively as possible. You might get serious about solar microgen feed-in tariffs on roofs. Is that a technology that the UK can add a great deal to with our subsidies? And does that have a significant long-term potential for global mitigation? I'm not convinced. And there's a key question in terms of overall cost for people, whether offshore wind does that. I'm not sure if I have the right answers, but I'd much rather we were asking those questions than the current question. And then the next stage is how you get a proper commercialisation strategy. How can you get the costs down? And that leads me to how we get to what I would like to see, which is a fully competitive market from where the prices are set in the market, not administratively, from EMR. So things that I would like to see, a clearer timetable on getting away from administrative price setting to fully functioning technology neutral market. I'm sure you've all read Annex E on the EMR delivery plan. That's a lucky copy of it for you there. But when I ask the question, when do we get to fully competitive market, it says there's no delivery plan. And we may see over the next week more details coming into that. For me, that's not good enough. We should be having a clear path to when these things will be able to compete in a market, technology neutral market. I would say we should also be more aggressive in the prices on digression. If Dong says €100 by 2020 or £87 a megawatt hour by 2020, surely that should be the price. Go on, here's a contract for it, go and achieve it. Here's a clear digression that we're going to get there. I'm not convinced that that's not going to be the case, but that should be the challenge in the way governments should be thinking about it. I'm actually a bit more relaxed about companies making money in the short term if there is that clear exit strategy from where they're headed. I think the lessons actually from solar fits is that it took and the kind of action that was taken there is it took a crisis to put that aggressive digression in place. If it had been in place at the start, it might not have ended costing as much, both politically and economically. So the most important thing that needs to be done is to make decisions soon and stick by them. The less year-on-year horse trading you have in the system, the better. The less prices being decided on how good companies' lobbying is, not good on how good the technology is.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. A few differences of opinion there with some of our panelists, which I'm sure we'll be able to tease out shortly. But before we do that, it's the last, but certainly not least member of our panel, it's Peter Atherton. And if you know anything about this space, you will know that Peter Atherton is the city energy analyst par excellence, I think we could say. Now doing equity research at it's Liberum. Sorry, I'm never quite sure. But that's okay, because I only ever have to write it down. Usually. So, give us your, in a nutshell, views, so that we can then chew and get to a bit of a debate going here, because I know I can rely on you to be provocative as well.
Not at all. Thank you, Fiona. Sort of this morning, I sort of turned my attention to this and started to think what I was going to say, and I was pondering the title, Policy to Reduce Cost of Renewables, and then Guy's email popped into my inbox and said, you've got 10 minutes, make sure you don't overshoot 10 minutes. I was thinking, Christ, I'll never fill 10 minutes on this. And so I'm really relieved that Fiona is sort of moving to me in only 5 minutes, because if you think about it, policy to reduce the cost of renewables, that means sort of government policy. So we have a government policy which is to massively intervene into the power market and set this very large target for renewables over a very, very short period of time, which turns out, funny enough, to be very, 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 very expensive. And now we need sort of other policies to try and sort of bring those costs down, but there's not really a lot that the government can do, having decided on the pathway that we're on. I mean, the renewables, in particular the renewables that we have to deploy, which is basically onshore wind and offshore wind and a bit of one or two other things, maybe some biomass, hopefully. These are big pieces of kit that require a lot of steel and a lot of concrete, and they just cost a lot of money. And there's not a lot that a government or policymakers or everything else can really do anything about that. We're talking about huge procurement. The cost of energy that goes into the steel and the concrete is one of the biggest factors that will turn out to the cost. Because on offshore wind we import 90% of the built value, the largest swing factor in the price of offshore wind is the euro sterling exchange rate. There's not a lot the government can do about the euro sterling exchange rate apart from keep it low for the wider economy. How you get costs down is through innovation and competition. Our energy policy is the exact opposite of competition and innovation. This is government procurement. It's semi-government procurement at the moment, and it's about to become almost government procurement. And there's this great belief, you read it all the time from the Climate Change and others, that there's some sort of inexorable, God-given sort of pathway that all costs will fall. Well, I don't notice that buying tanks or buying government-advised tanks or ships and government builds roads, those costs don't seem to come down very much. I remember looking at the cost of HS1 and thinking, geez, that's expensive, until I saw the cost of Crossrail. I thought, bloody hell, that really is expensive. And then I saw the cost of HS2, and I thought, well, that is really, really expensive. But that's what we're dealing with here. We're talking about public procurement. And there is a natural bias in any supply chain to price the subsidy. You give them 150 quid per megawatt hour, and you know what? The supply chain will allow them an 8 to 10, 12% IRR return on that, and they will price up to the limit. Absolutely they will. So there's no way the government can reduce these costs. Perhaps, well, maybe reduce the subsidy ultimately. Let's look at the cost base of the sort of technologies in there. So renewable industry obviously always points to solar, and there has been substantial cost reductions in solar, there's no question. But solar's been going for 40 years. It's a technology which people really started working on 40 years ago. And the sort of best analysis I read on solar, you can see the sort of cost reduction per unit of solar. It's actually been pretty consistent over that 30 to 40-year period. We've had a very large reduction in solar costs, obviously starting about 2008, as the Chinese have swamped the market. But they're selling at below cost, so they're selling at zero margin, actually selling at negative margins. That accounts for that sort of large current reduction. But certainly, there has been fundamental reductions in the cost of solar, but it's taken a very, very, very long time. It's taken a lot of private companies to be very innovative and for technology to take time to mature. If we look at onshore wind, one of the sort of preparations I was doing, I started to look back at my models from 2008 and 2007 and what the companies were telling us about the cost of onshore wind in the UK and the continent. So we used to put in, they would tell us 1.1, 1.3 million pounds a megawatt, but it was definitely falling to about 0.8, 0.7. I actually have some of my old models where I've got 0.7, 0.8 million per megawatt hour for like 2012, 2013. What's the reality today? The latest guidance from the major players is about 1.4 to 1.8 million pounds per megawatt. Now, you could do it cheaper if you don't expect to have very good wind conditions and you build on a nice flat plane, but where you've actually got to go for the wind and where you've got to go for the planning, it's going to cost you that amount. So onshore wind really just doesn't come down in any material way. As for offshore wind, it seems to be going up. So the cost of offshore wind seems to be going up. And now it may eventually come down and the 100 euros per megawatt hour, and we all look forward to that one. Just point out that is still twice the current electricity price, so it's an heroic achievement it is actually achieved, but it is still twice the current wholesale electricity price. So offshore wind, so again, looking back at my models, from 5-6 years ago, we were told by the industry that it was about 2.5 to 3 million pounds per megawatt, maybe 2 million 2.5 maximum, sort of 2012, 2030, those sort of numbers. Now, 3.5 to 4 sort of numbers people use, depending whether you're including the offshore connection costs as well. It doesn't appear to be any great coming down in prices. And again, it's partly because we're trying to do something very quick. It's partly because we are dealing with difficult technologies, and this price, the subsidy, is a very real issue. I'm sure biomass. Government are putting increasing emphasis on biomass. You notice on all their projections of how we get to the renewables target, they keep on inching offshore wind down. It used to be 20 gigawatts, then it was 18, and then it was 16, and now they seem to be suggesting, well, maybe 12, maybe 14, because they sort of recognise that it's staggeringly expensive. So there's sort of, amount of biomass. They used to say 20 terawatt hours of biomass by 2020, and now they're talking 40 terawatt hours, 50 terawatt hours maybe. So it's a lot cheaper. But biomass is a hard cost base to get a handle on. The feedstock itself is only 30% of the delivered cost. So you look at Drax's biomass project. 30% is the feedstock, 30% is the processing of the feedstock, pelleting it, and then 30% is the transport cost. So even if you can lock in the sort of contracts with the great forest decapiters of Georgia, you also got to lock in massive logistical chain. The logistical chain behind biomass is just gigantic. Drax 3 units is 40 trains a day. So just to give it half a Drax requires 40 trains of biomass a day to feed it. You've got to keep that stuff dry from the day it's chopped down to the day you burn it in North Yorkshire. It's travelled several thousand miles on several different forms of transport to do that. So controlling cost in biomass is going to be a real challenge. So I think if you're looking for the silver bullet that's going to make all this more affordable for the consumer, cost reduction really ain't going to be it. You've got to find something else, or you've got to sign the consumer up that the sort of price is a price worth paying. I'm going to pick, if I may, just one or two comments from what was said. Charles, you talked about de-risking and reducing risk. Well, actually under the CFDs, what's actually happening is, of course, you don't de-risk things. Risk is risk. You can't get rid of it. What you can do is transfer it or move it around, hopefully to the person who's best able to bear that risk. What the CFDs, of course, do is transfer risk from the developer to the consumer. Gas prices, the driver behind cost at the moment, absolutely. But don't forget, we've only got 30 terawatt hours of subsidised renewables on the system at the moment. By 2020, we're meant to have 110 to 120, and by 2030, we'll have 400 terawatt hours of supported, subsidised power, low carbon power. So that's why the price effect of renewables is pretty small at the moment, because we haven't got much. But we're going to have 3 times as much by the end of the decade, 4 times as much by the end of the decade, and 10 times as much by 2030. Shale, can't see the rigs. There are hundreds of rigs actually in the UK at the moment. You can't see them because they're tiny, and they've got little pirate hedges around them. So we've got hundreds of them actually at the moment. We have quite a large onshore industry, but you just can't see them. Nobody knows they're there. So shale shouldn't be any different. And finally, this whole point about UK being in the vanguard. We need to. It's incredibly good to do this. That just can't be true. Where you want to be is in the middle of the pack. Yeah, if the rest of the world goes like this, I want to be, 50 largest competitors. If we all move like that, I want to be number 25. Because the risk if you get this wrong is catastrophe. The risk if you get this right is you're just a tiny, tiny bit better off. Sure.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to find that you entirely lived up to my billing. Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you for that. Well, there's some very provocative points in there, and I think you had a bit of an advantage there because of going last. You could sort of pick over what some of the others had said. So before we open up to the audience and get their questions and comments, I will give the other panelists a brief chance to respond to everything that we've heard from the other speakers so far. Charles, you will first.
Just a brief comment. First of all, I think that we have at this stage moved away from markets. We've had no choice. A market's very good at choosing the right point between 2 different alternatives. And so if it was security of supply and affordability, the market can broadly get that. When you bring in a third element, which is the need to decarbonise, You can only do that if government gives an indication of the relative importance of each one. So that we've had to move towards a more structured situation, but without any doubt in the 2020s, the intention has to be to get it back into a market structure, because that's the best way of delivering the cost advantages to consumers.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
No, look forward to hearing some.
Great. Okay, then that's very modest of both. We will move on now to questions from the audience. I can see a hand up here already from the Energy Intensive Users Group, if I'm not mistaken. Now, would you like to?
Yes, Jeremy Nicholson from the Energy
Do you want to stand up,
Intensive User
Jeremy,
Group.
actually, and just introduce yourself?
Firstly, in response to your question,
Yep.
pricing is complicated and won't go into all that now. Suffice to say that domestic household prices for electricity are amongst the highest in Europe and Germany, but the industrial costs are relatively competitive at the moment. We have the opposite situation in the UK, and the add-on costs by 2020 will be very, very large, according to the Committee on Climate Change, rising from around 21% of industrial users' electricity price at the moment to somewhere between 50 or 60%. But that wasn't my question. My question was about offshore wind and the more expensive renewables. And I'd love to see these come down in price, and no doubt that can happen. But isn't the lesson of other industries, and I have to say, I mean no disrespect to Don, but you do remind me of something of a nuclear lobbyist circa 1960-70 saying why we should spend a large amount of our money on graphite-core magnets reactors that no one else built, and that we will be terribly grateful for this in the end. It didn't quite work out that way. And I'd love to believe you're right. But one of the things that wasn't in place then was a date by which this subsidy will be removed, or at least all low carbon technologies will be competing on a level playing field. I'd love to see that. If you believe in your own technology, can't you say, I will be proud to say my technology will not be in economic nappies in 2020? Because I'd love to hear that, and I wonder if the rest of
Well, I mean, what I've said is what I believe we will achieve, which is we'll be down at €100 a megawatt hour projects we're taking forward in 2020.
Then you could afford £100 a megawatt hour strike price.
Well, it doesn't translate like that, because if you want to get into a debate around how to do MPV, I'm happy to do that. Strike price is for a contract that isn't as long as the asset life. So clearly strike prices and cost of energy are not the same thing, and I'm presuming everyone in the room is conversant with that, so we have to go into that. But absolutely, interesting you choose. Was it graphite rods?
Graphite core.
Graphite core. Right, I'm not a nuclear scientist. I guess there are lots and lots of examples. Pretty much all technologies come down the cost curve. There are some that haven't. And I don't see any reason to believe that offshore wind can't come down the cost curve like so many other technologies have done. And I take the point, it takes time, but it also takes certainty, and we need to be able to get on with the trajectory. It's our responsibility to get to the point, as you say, Guy, where we're competing and we're able to compete. And we need to earn the right to build out our capacity in the 2020s by having got the costs down. It's absolutely right. We should do that.
Do you get the cost down faster if you invest more upfront now? Because
Well,
that's what
there's a balance. I mean, there is a lot of innovation theory, research into innovation theory, which I certainly won't bore you with now, which looks at what is the optimum pace of investment to achieve the most efficient reduction in cost. So we could debate that forever. I think, what we see in the real world is we see a digression in the CFD strike prices. That's what we've got to achieve if we're going to be in the market.
Okay. And what about the point that Peter was making, that if you've got a sort of subsidy at a set price, then that's what everyone would want to. That's quite.
Well,
that's
I think there's a very important point that I would absolutely echo, which is where you don't have competition in the supply chain, you can actually get taken to the cleanest by the supply chain, which is why we're very keen to see the development of the supply chain in the UK, particularly for turbine suppliers. It's no secret that we love Siemens.
Is it about a third of the components of a turbine are built in the UK at the moment? No, not components of a turbine, but
The total cost, it varies.
Renewable UK,
Yeah, I mean, it depends which wind farm you look at. It could be low as 10%, it could be as high as 50%. It very much varies depending on the particular wind farm. But we and other developers have made a big commitment to increase the UK content. Don't necessarily want to get to a jobs debate.
When I say quote on the London Array, that it was only 10%.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So the London Array figure was 10% of the supply chain.
Yeah, Robin Riggs 50%. So, the figures we said in our Walney development, I think it was
That's why you were
30.
And presumably getting more of that done in the UK is going to be better for the economy as a whole.
So that might push up costs. Asking people to transplant, assembly plants into the UK, and also you've got to look at the overall cost. I mean, I remember Vestas, talking about their Alan White investment, which people thought was a great idea, but as far as I can see, they wanted us to not only subsidise hugely the products coming out of that factory, they wanted a taxpayer's grant at least half the price of building the factory, and they wanted a grant for every employee that they're going to employ in the factory. Well, we wouldn't build a factory on that basis, or I would. You may keep the apparent cost of the wind turbine relatively low, but if the taxpayers having to pay for the factory and pay for every employee that goes and works in the factory, the overall cost of the UK isn't quite as low. So actually, if you want to minimise the cost, then you let people build wherever it's most economic to build, and that might be in China, not here.
Yeah, it's worth saying though that these are big things. It's actually quite valuable to build them near the market because they're not easy things to transport. So there are good reasons why we'll see turbine factories in the UK, I think, just because the logistics are very challenging if you've got to ship them halfway around the world.
I think it's key to public acceptability as well. That if we want people to buy into the concept of renewable electricity, that if you're seeing the regeneration of Humberside and areas like that, where tremendous numbers of new jobs can be created in areas which will be in long-term decline, then you've got an industrial policy which sits alongside your energy policy. And I think that's a real gain. And where people say, well, is it actually justifying paying us a higher price than we could do by just going for unabated coal? Then actually when you can see the big industrial benefits which come through alongside it, then that's a really key selling point. Peter mentioned this point about being 25 out of 50 in the chain. 25, I suspect, may be the worst of both worlds, because if you're an early adopter, you are going to pay more where you will get a supply chain investment. If you're going to be a late adopter in the 40s, you will probably pay less, but you certainly won't get the supply chain. In the middle, you'll probably get neither.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'll take some more questions from the audience. We've got one at the back here and in the front here. So I saw you first, sir.
Neil Hurst from the Grantham Institute Imperial College. I just want to comment what a disappointment it is that our programme of carbon capture and storage in the UK has been such a failure. We started, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. We were going to have 4 projects. Over a period of years, it dwindled down to an organic project which failed. We then started again with another competition. Slightly mysteriously, when we thought the winner was going to be announced, they said we're going to carry on with 2 projects. It's a very important technology. It is a technology that is crucially important to whether globally the question of climate change can be addressed. When you look at the reliance of countries like China and India on coal, it is a technology and is at a stage where the UK could have a leading role, not necessarily the heavy engineering parts, but in the know-how on all the things that Britain does best. Unfortunately, it seems to have been a big disappointment. That's where I feel we should be focusing if we want to make an international contribution. I don't know whether it's the answer or not, but it is worth spending quite a lot of money, in my opinion, to find out whether it is a fully viable option.
Thank you very much. So CCS there, and I'll give you a little sneak preview of a little factoid that's going to be published tomorrow in a report that I've seen, which is that CCS is woefully unknown among the general public. So, when you ask about sort of wind farms, solar, things like that, people know about it. When you ask about CCS, about 40% of people have never heard of it. So, are we doing appallingly on this? We've had this competition, which, as we know, just has been going on for years. We don't seem to be any closer. Every time we seem to get a step closer to having this, having something built, it seems to evaporate. Guy, what's policy changes for you?
I don't want to get too into CCS, although I did raise it in the debate about renewables. But
it's part of this same landscape. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you look at the 2 criteria which I set out about which technologies you should support, long-term potential contribution to global mitigation, and could we in the UK actually contribute something to maximising cost reductions, then I'd say CCS would tick both of those criteria. I still think there's a great mystery about why CCS hasn't happened quick enough in the UK, and the political support to really really go for it. I mean, we are distracted with things like meeting the renewable energy target. I think that's the kind of effect the risk you have. I think that's the point.
So you're blaming offshore wind for destroying our
I think there's a lack of political. I'm not trying to push the point too far, but there's a lack of political will, I would say, on CCS. And
well, we keep being told that CCS is really good for the UK because we've got, the North Sea, we've got all those depleted oil fields, we've got the kit because we've got the North Sea oil and gas expertise. It should be win-win.
Do you really want to give the coal industry $1 billion subsidies? If you think you have a problem with subsidizing wind, imagine you give the coal industry $1 billion subsidies.
Yeah.
Which
so
is
it's cost, basically, you're saying. It's
not
basically
cost, it's who you actually subsidize, because the CCS basically is the coal industry waiting for £1 billion of subsidies.
Yeah. Okay.
We're seeing this across the world. In Germany have abandoned CCS, partly because of popular opposition to it.
Yeah.
That in Norway has been knocked back by about 3 years. And so that right across the world, people are realising it is significantly more challenging. We still are in there looking at 2 plants. We changed it fundamentally to recognise that gas should be part of that equation as well. It shouldn't just be on coal. We wanted to do 1 coal, 1 gas. So we're still well ahead of almost every other country. The one which I suspect is probably leading the world now is China. And they're seeing this as a technology which they won't be looking to cheapen and to sell back to people, but they'll be looking to actually develop the technology and then sell it globally.
Well, ironically, it was a UK project that led CCS in China. So, yeah. Anything you've got to say on this briefly, Peter?
CCS to me is a classic.
Do you even believe in it?
Well, CCS is a classic example, I think, of great wishful thinking because it sort of solves a lot of these policy problems, hitting engineering reality. And the engineering reality is that CCS is very, very tough to do. And yes, it may be cracked at some point in the next couple of decades, but it's pretty unlikely to be cracked in the next 10 to 15 years at a commercial level. And maybe instead of trying to go immediately to big demonstration plants, we should pour money into R&D and take it forward in a sensible way.
Okay, thanks for that. Now we had we've got 2 questions over here and we've got some over here, so I'm going to take 2 at once here. I'll take you in a second, sir, but I saw the gentleman behind you first. Yes.
Great, thank you. I'm AJ Gambier, like the previous question, also in Imperial College London. I was quite intrigued by a point that Peter made, I think, which was looking at the last 40 years of solar. It's had a fairly sort of steady fall in cost, and it's had a progress ratio, they call it about 80%. But in the early days, at least the first kind of 15 years, maybe 2 decades, there weren't really deployment subsidies for solar. So what kind of lessons can we draw from that for less mature technologies like offshore wind? Okay,
thank you very much for that. And in the front, sir.
Nick Park, Centrica. Guy described the 2020 renewables decision as being the original sin of energy policy. The European Commission are currently thinking about a 2030 renewables target. I'd be interested in the panel's view of a second original sin.
Okay, let's really get stuck in then. Okay, thanks. I'm going to give those questions to panelists to get the first one on, straightforward one on subsidies, bringing down costs in solar and what the lessons elsewhere, or not even bringing down costs, or a lack of subsidies not necessarily hindering the bringing down of costs. However you want to take that. And then this question, right, so I'm going to go right along the panel asking if we need a 2030 renewables target. We already know what you think, Guy. I'm guessing this is a, what is it?
No, it's a no, yes. It's a clear no.
It's a clear no. I thought it might be, but you never know. You might have heard some other arguments that change your mind in the course of the day. Would you like to see a 2030 renewables target, John?
No, I wouldn't. I think the objective should be low carbon. Renewables is a part of a low carbon solution. It is not a separate solution.
Okay.
I think, as I've said very clearly, we need certainty on where we're heading with our energy infrastructure and our energy journey beyond 2020. That's not. There are many ways to skin that cat. I probably agree with Charles that there may well be other ways that we can achieve that. We do need some certainty on the trajectory beyond 2020, though. whether it's low carbon or renewables, we need to know as investors where we're
So
going.
you would be just happy, and you're just as happy, and your investors would be just as happy with a 2030 low carbon target or with the carbon budget?
Well, we're going to have to compete with other low carbon technologies, so
Right.
it's a bit of becomes a moot point, or it
So
has to
if it's
become a
not,
moot
if it's
point.
not a specific renewables target, that's not a massive problem for you.
As long as there's some signal that we're becoming, we have a low carbon journey to go there. Yes, we need a pathway. We don't want to be picking winners.
Okay, Peter.
No, absolutely not. No, definitely, no.
Yeah.
No, avoid that one. No, that is definitely a no. The problem is,
You want to say no a few more times?
renewables are expensive for the UK. I mean, they may
Yeah.
be relatively cheap for some European countries, but they're a very expensive option for the UK. It's why we're
Yeah.
it's why we are the world leaders in offshore wind. Well, nobody else is freaking dumb enough to employ 5 megawatt hour. So, that's the point. We need a lot of terawatt hours to hit these targets. The only way we're going to get them is through burning wood or
Okay.
building offshore wind. So no, definitely not.
Thank you. Brilliant. Speaking your mind there. Our questioner, Nick, what do you think should be on the 2030 renewables target?
It's a very difficult one, but I'm inclined to agree with all 4 members of the panel. I think that if you want to get a least cost way to 2030, then a separate renewables target might not be the best way to do it, and a clear carbon framework for 2030 might be better.
Thanks. Can I just open this, because we've got your question about the subsidies in a second, but I do just want to kind of get a little bit more on this question, because I know it's kind of key, thorny issue. Would anyone like to defend a 2030 renewables target? Anyone? Oh, we've got a ticker. Yes, hello.
Christy, I'm from the
Kirsty, why do you like it?
yeah, low carbon finance group. I think it's less a defence and more just a question. I mean, it's a complex debate, and I think there's the issue about the current point, a range of factors that are going on in the market at present. There's financial issues, there's turbulence in energy markets, energy prices, and there's also a set of uncertainties about the level of commitments government have. And I think we just need to tease out more clearly what the impact of taking away a renewables target is in the near term, rather than say you've got to have one for 2030. And I think there's a sort of an asymmetrical debate, and we need to tease it out. And what I observe is that people are coming to very emphatic decisions, and we would benefit from understanding how investors are going to react in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe even the next 1 to 2 years. Because if we lose momentum in the renewables sector, it'll be very difficult to ramp it up again if we're really talking about very substantial sums of money that will need to go into that and a range of other technologies. So it's just really a question about can we have a more nuanced debate about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think we had another couple of takers at the back. You're not speaking in favour, but you are.
Big Spark. It provides a direction of travel around which investors can coalesce. At the moment, over the last 15 years, we've had numerous renewable energy targets. We've missed them all, but it has provided a direction of travel against which we can check progress. It's a simple instrument.
Thank you. And let me just, I'm going to do a straw poll, a very unscientific show of hands. If we were to choose tonight whether or not to have a 2030 renewables target, how many in this room would vote against such a target? There we go. That's a clear majority, I would say, from this room. Anyone else owning up to voting for? There we go. And anyone sitting on the fence? So there's some a small showing for undecided as well there, and also I think there are some people who didn't put up their hands at all. Very naughty. That's good. Okay, well I think we've covered that point, and I think there's been an interesting sort of range of opinions there. Now back to your question, sir, on subsidies. I'm going to give that straight to you, Peter, as you kind of spoke to that earlier.
I'm not sure what would be the answer. I'm not sure what it tells us. Sorry, no, it's not really satisfactory, but I actually don't know.
Okay, anyone else want to take this on? No, what is the kind of sweet spot for subsidies and advantage of technology?
We don't know. If we did know, then it would be,
We'd be doing it.
it'd be very straightforward. Yeah.
I think it was driven by the pace of technological change, a lot of that coming from your own university, which did groundbreaking stuff. But I was finding in my constituency that every pensioner was saying to me, I'm putting solar panels on my roof. And I go back to DEC and say that this is about to go literally through the roof. And they say, no, it isn't. The model's working perfectly. And they said, no, that this is about to go badly, badly wrong. And we could see it because, anecdotally, that everybody who had available funds wanted to go down the solar route.
Yeah.
And so it was just, we got to the point where the returns were so enormous. And people were saying, no, pensions won't do it. They won't live long enough to see the benefit. And I promise you, they are doing it. And that was the sweet point, really, where people were looking at this rationally, listening to Moneybox, reading various magazines. They just saw this was the point of
the Paul Lewis factor. That's what it is on Moneybox. There we go. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for that. Now, we did have some other questions around here, so I'm not neglecting you. I'm going to take a few at once. Sir, I saw you first, and then at the back here, and then you, sir. So if you could stand and give us your question.
Chris Coggins, it's a question really of the, I suppose the comment last one that Charles made about solar. We've had nice sunny weather, fine, solar power. But with regard to wind energy, where has the wind come in the last week, 10 days, and what do we provide as backup for wind power?
Okay, there we go. That question of backup, very good. We haven't had that yet. Thank you for that. And I said you, didn't I? Yes. Hello.
Hi, I'm Andy Mayer from the ASF. We've got 11 manufacturing parks in the UK. Just looking very quickly at 3 of them. One in Deeside produces industrial coatings that help improve the energy efficiency of things like steel for buildings. One in Alfreton produces polyurethanes that go into things like the insulation foam for the Green Deal. One in Cinderford is a metals recycling plant. It's probably one of the only examples of a properly circular economy in terms of precious metals. All of those factories face energy price increases as a result of carbon price floor of about 20% by 2015. Take all the other carbon measures into account, it looks like about 58% by 2020. Now, the message that sends to the investors, principally in Germany, is that the UK is a very expensive place to do business. How does that look in terms of the green growth agenda if we're being given that signal in order to give dollars investors a signal that it's okay to build wind turbines in Denmark?
Brilliant, thank you very much. Thank you for that. And then what was my other question? Yes, please. Hello.
Thank you. Charlie Nagle from CJAX. I work in the offshore wind industry. And I wanted to talk, quickly ask, going back to just the previous conversation about UK content.
Yeah.
Because it's very important being a UK-based company. But we know that there's a tension between that and the costs, the rising costs. But to pick up on Charles's point earlier about the jobs and the growth, and hopefully such a UK content policy will through, is there a particular percentage? I know Dong talked about 50%, and you sort of said there are other ones which are even higher. But would there be a sort of percentage of UK content that would sort of make those who are very unhappy with subsidies more happy, should we say, because they can see the benefits that come to UK jobs and infrastructure?
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much for that. Right, so what percentage of this the renewables kit should be sort of UK supply chain and therefore supplying UK jobs? Is there a kind of sweet spot there? Then this question of this perception that, particularly in Germany, the person was saying, getting a message that we are a very expensive place to do business, and how can we tackle that? And then finally, this thorny question of the backup for renewables and the costs thereof. Let's see, who hasn't gone first yet? I'll take you, Ben, and then we'll ask the other panelists.
Okay, just coming to the question on variability. When you look at energy system modelling, and there's quite a bit of published research on this, at the levels of wind that we expect to see on the system, balancing the system is not going to be a major challenge. So I think we need to be careful not to forget that we're going to have a mix of energy generating technologies on the grid, and no technology is free of the need for backup. All technologies go out of production from time to time. Wind actually is probably more predictable and more distributed than losing a couple of gigawatts of nuclear, for example, when something breaks. So there is a cost. It's relatively modest at the levels of penetration that we expect to see. So I guess we can talk about that later, but for me, I don't see this as a major challenge until we get to the very, very high and probably unachievable levels of variable renewables on the system that some people might have talked about some time ago. In terms of the question on prices and the impact of prices on energy-intensive businesses, I'm no expert on that. I'll leave that to others to comment on. I guess the only question I'd have is what's the counterfactual?
These aren't energy-intensive. We have energy-intensive plants. These ones don't get cutter pricing. They go through hit by this price rise.
So, but my question, I guess, for the other panellists here will be to talk about what the counterfactual is. And obviously, I guess you've looked at that as to, there's a number you've thrown out, was it 58%? I presume you have a comparative number if there were a different energy policy that would give you a different view. I don't know what that would be. And finally, your question around UK content. I don't think there's an answer to your question. As developers, we've said we're aiming to get above 50% by the end of this decade, and clearly policy stability and the ability to invest steadily and continuously in the sector is what will generate the supply chain confidence that will create investment and jobs in the UK. So for me, that's the most important thing, is we have clear and consistent development of the supply chain, because there's policy stability and investors in that supply chain feel confident to put their hands in their pockets.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And the Honourable Member for Wealdon, surely this number, this percentage of stuff that should be built in the UK, for you it must be 100, surely?
Well, as Minister, I set a target of 50% for the industry, which the industry has said that they will rise to. Realistically, there are some things where you've got to get a balance in terms of what's the cheapest place of producing things, and that's not always going to be in the UK. Some things we physically don't make in the United Kingdom, but I would like it to be as high as we can.
Are we doing well towards getting that?
We're moving in the right direction. Certainly the expectation London Array, the first phase was about 10%, now normally it's hitting 30%, I'm told, so that we're certainly moving very much in the right direction, but a lot of work still to be done.
Thanks very much, thank you for that. And what about this perception that the UK is an expensive place to do business?
I think that it is a real challenge. I think the biggest issue which we face here is that the legacy of history. That we have the oldest nuclear plants of any developed country in the world. We have the oldest coal plants of any developed country in the world. The Sizewell B, the most recent nuclear plant, was commissioned almost 30 years ago. Drax, the most recent coal plant, was commissioned in the 1950s when I was born. And that we haven't seen enough investment. Now, if you look at what's happened in Germany, they've had a continuing program of investment to bring things up to date. What has delivered, therefore, the cheaper prices historically in the UK has been a dash for gas, at a time when gas was plentiful and cheap, and secondly, sweating the assets beyond what was economically sensible in the long run. And what we've now got to do is to make up for the failure to invest over decades, and that is going to have a price, and we've got to find the ways in which we can mitigate those prices. But at the end of the day, if we don't get it, we have energy insecurity, and the price of that is much higher than the price of energy security.
Thank you very much, thank you for that. Guy, I'm going to give you your chance to come in and these questions now.
On the backup issue that Chris raised, I tend to agree with Benj on this. I don't think we're there where this is a big problem yet. Maybe when we get to 30–40% penetration, we get into real problems. It's something to be conscious of, but I don't see it as necessary. As long as you allow, and this probably comes back to a debate about capacity mechanism, as long, I would say, as you allow the market to give that price signal. And I think one of the big worries about the kind of intervention on intervention is we're now going to give a subsidy to gas power plants. And I worry that's the wrong option. On the last question about UK content, I get very, very nervous about this. I completely understand it politically, why it's important and why it matters. Economically, I think Peter kind of raised this point. It's a big risk if you start saying that X technology is going to be certain part British. Free trade is advantageous to the UK. If we can buy something cheaper somewhere else, we benefit from that. And that's an important story to be told. It's not told generally enough, and happens, matters in the energy debate as well. On Andrew's point about, I think he was having a dig at the carbon floor price. I think that's what. But it doesn't make sense with the ETS in lots of ways. I think the answer is that we need to get the ETS fixed, and we just produced a paper looking at some of the ideas on that. But I would also argue that some of the costs of renewables, as we head to 2020, in terms of increasing the price, are actually a bigger contribution to price increases than the carbon floor price. That's not excusing. I mean, as I said, the main attitude should be this is the minimum we are spending to decarbonise. But
Thanks very much. Thanks for that. And I'm going to give the last word on the debate to Peter. So we had three great questions there. You don't have to do all of them. You can.
Well, I can certainly look through. On the jobs front, I was trying to work this one out, sort of make this policy sort of jobs neutral. I reckon it was at least 500% UK content, i.e. you've actually got to build up a very large export industry to make this sort of remotely jobs neutral and export several times the amount that you're actually building yourself. And the reason is very simple. The climate change, the support levy, £7.6 billion, that's how much we're going to spend on all this in 2020. That's actually in 2012 money, so if you inflate that up, it's about 9.3 billion. And bear in mind, by the way, the total amount we spent last year on electricity in the UK was £51 billion. So 9 billion is going to be spent in 2020 on this subsidy. Now that's half from industry and half from the consumer. So 4.5 billion comes out of the pockets of consumers. But as we all know, it's a very regressive tax, effectively, on consumers. It falls mainly to poor people, but mainly on poor people, who would probably spend that money in the shops. So they'd spend that money in highly labour-intensive retail sector, largely. We're not going to let them spend that money on highly intensive retail sector, which creates lots of jobs. We're going to take that money off them and make them spend it and give it to a handful, a tiny amount of highly capital-intensive companies. Highly capital-intensive companies and businesses who produce not even 1/20 of the jobs per pound spent than you get in retail sector. And we're going to do exactly the same for business. We're going to take £4.5 billion off businesses like BASF, who are employing lots and lots of people, and again give it to companies like Dong and others who employ virtually nobody. So you have to to make this a jobs generating. Sorry, basically not thinking in your offshore wind business. You employ lots of people back in Denmark, but so to make this a jobs generating activity, you've actually got to get a massive export industry. And hope everybody just buys it off you. In terms of the cost of industry, it is absolutely shocking that this doesn't get more coverage. I mean, the DEC paper that came out where they showed the costs to domestic, the papers, Fiona no doubt picked it up, everybody focused on this sort of fantasy number that they came up with, it's going to save domestic consumers £160 in 2020 and all that sort of stuff. But actually, on DEC's own numbers, it's actually right. It's like 50% on top of the energy bill for for medium businesses, and even more for small businesses. And for small businesses in particular, energy can be a really, really big cost. It is quite amazing that the media and others don't pick this up more. That this is a really aggressive tax on small businesses, which again are the motor of the economy and the biggest driver on job creation in the economy. What's the counterfactual? Well, we know what the engineered counterfactual will be, which will be making gas-fired power stations break even at north of £100. That's where the carbon price floor gets you. So if you drive up conventional fuels to a high enough price, anything's going to look cheap, but businesses are still going to go bust. Because it's not whether it's a bit cheaper or a bit more expensive, it's the absolute cost of the power. And that's what I think is often missing in this debate. The CCC in particular always do it. They do everything against their little benchmarks or their counterfactuals without ever coming out and saying, actually, this is what it's going to cost you. Pounds, shillings and pence. Pounds and pence. And can you as a business afford that? In terms of keeping the lights on, yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of renewables on the system at the moment, but you know, according to all the hopes, there will be. And I think the problem starts in around about the early 2020s, and we are going to have to think seriously about how we keep the lights on.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that. I think we've taken everyone's questions now. I hope everyone feels they've had a chance to have their say and participate in the debate. I think there's still some line left if you want to debate a little bit more. But we have had a suitably, if you'll excuse the term, heated debate up here, covering huge amounts of ground, everything from sticking carbon under the North Sea to the jobs, supply chain, and what's involved there. So I found it very stimulating. I think we've covered huge amounts of this topic. I hope you find it illuminating, generating light as well as heat. And I'd just like then to get you to thank our panellists. Thank you.